Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, my sidekicks, Clay Jones and CJ.
Hello.
Glad to have you both with me tonight.
There's been a lot of good stuff going on.
It has. It looks interesting. One of the things that has cropped up, most states have legislative sessions going on right now,
Yes,
and across the country, apparently 9 states have had medical marijuana bills filed.
Mm-hmm.
There is a long, long gap between bills being filed and bills being passed.
Right.
Of the 9, I would say that probably New Hampshire will probably pass. They've already passed a medical marijuana bill, I think it's 4 times, and the governor has vetoed it each time. But they have a new governor now, and the new governor has said that if the bill shows up on, is it her desk, she'll sign it. So
Cool.
Awesome.
So that's probably state number 19.
Well, legalization failed in Maryland and Maine this past week.
Okay, and I think probably on legalization, it's much more important that bills have been filed than it is that bills get passed this year. Because I think one thing that's been striking all across the country, both at the state level and in Congress, has been that more so since any time that I can remember, currently seated politicians have been willing to talk about the possibility. They're at least willing to admit that there is a question there. And that strikes me as rather a major thaw in what's been going on.
Yeah, but like you were saying earlier, that these politicians just rely on their old habits of keeping their base happy and not worrying about what the general public wants.
There was an interesting guy on Book TV last night, and I didn't hear his whole speech, but his gimmick was what would happen if mayors ruled the world. And if you look at what has been happening in drug law enforcement, we have more and more situations in which mayors are declaring themselves non-combatants in the war on drugs. Bloomberg in New York City has finally done a whole lot to quash the New York police on some of the more outrageous of their stop and frisk procedures, and has been doing more. The Oakland city government, of course, has gone all out in terms of medical marijuana, at least. In Colorado, a couple of the city governments have become relatively outspoken. And even here in Houston, we don't hear very much about strenuous, all-out drug law enforcement. Now, we don't have any kind of amnesty declared. We haven't adopted citations for marijuana, but it strikes me, just looking around the city, that drug law enforcement in general has kind of been shoved to the back burner. It's percolating upward.
Well, now, our illustrious district attorney, Mr. Anderson, he's pushing drugs back into the forefront. That Ms. Lykos kind of said, you know, let's back off of this. And with what she did, our jail has come down and been in compliance federally. We're not overpopulated.
Yeah.
We're not renting those jails in Louisiana.
Well, let's don't mention Mr. Anderson in polite company. He's a throwback to some really bad days in the Harris County District Attorney's Office. If the Democratic Party had managed to come up with any kind of halfway decent candidate, he wouldn't have been able to get elected. In what I'm saying, he's kind of the exception that proves the rule. He's a holdover from the bad old days that hasn't caught up with what's going on. But I would say probably that if you could get the mayors of Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston and Austin and San Antonio and put them in a closed room and put your ear up to the wall so that you could eavesdrop on it, that they would probably admit in private that there's no sense throwing money and resources at drug laws.
Oh, I agree.
So it's a slow way to get things done, but frankly, if a city like Oakland or Denver, or let's suppose, or if we can say Austin, or even suppose Houston, decides they're not going to waste effort and money enforcing the marijuana laws, that does a whole lot more good than having 3 Iowas or Kansases change their laws. If you want to get a law off the books, the best thing to do is just ignore it for a while.
But as well as our governor or our mayors don't want to push the drug laws, it's police departments are saying, oh, we need these laws.
Okay, the police departments are.
Yes.
But is the police chief?
Guess we'll have to find out. Call him up.
And that's what I'm saying is that once again, you have to actually look at, you can't just say the city or you just can't say the police. You have to break it down a little bit more. Now, the police union, for instance, has been strongly in favor of hard-nosed enforcement.
Right.
I'm not so sure that the police chief is. And even below the union level, if you look at rank and file police officers, I think you'll find a much bigger split there than it appears from what you see if you just read the newspaper or watch the TV news.
Most every single policeman that I've talked to individually,
Yeah.
they all think that the drug war is a waste.
Yes, and they say all they do is follow the rules that are on the book. The law that's on the book is what they follow. So if the laws were different,
well, that's only because they like what the laws are.
Well, yeah, the big question there is how do they follow the laws that are on the book? And one of the problems, one of the bad problems with prohibition laws in general, and here I'm not talking just drug prohibition. I'm talking alcohol prohibition, drug prohibition, laws against prostitution, laws against gambling, and if we institute gun prohibition, it'll work the same way. The problem with these laws is one of the first things they create is law enforcement corruption. And there are several reasons for it. First, there's just way too much money out there to be ignored. And the second, there's a sense of futility. They may enforce the drug laws every day for 20 years, but they haven't done anything to slow the drug traffic or drug use down. And a lot of cops, after a while, start shrugging their shoulders and say, I'm not doing any good. I might as well make a little bit out of this while it's going on. And as I say, it's a vice of prohibition, not a vice of drug laws. My favorite here, or two favorites. One, by around 1930, they were saying that every member of the Chicago police force was on Al Capone's payroll during alcohol prohibition. All, I'm sure, was an exaggeration, but Elliot Ness became known as the Untouchable because he was apparently the only federal treasury agency in Chicago that wasn't on the mob's payroll. And to keep picking on Chicago, a delightful sociological study from about 10 years ago that interviewed a lot of street prostitutes and working policemen. And the women interviewed all said that they were expected to give free sexual favors to Chicago policemen. Across the city, that averaged out to be about 3% of their total business. And in the interviews, the women and the police both characterized this as just a business tax to stay in business. So, and think about it. Can you think of any town of any size in this whole country that doesn't have open prostitution going on? And it's been prohibited for 100 years now. It's the same thing. And you're going to have, well, in about 1930, the Prohibition Bureau either fired, forced to resign, or sent to prison over 30% of their federal revenue agents because of corruption. In about 1935 or 36, the Secretary of the Treasury himself had to intervene and step in to the Bureau of Narcotics, which is the forerunner of the DEA, and fire more than a third of the agents in New York, which was their largest office, because of corruption. Then again in the 1970s, right after the DEA was organized as the DEA, once again they had to move in, and because of corruption, and this sprang to some extent from the famous French Connection case, over a third of the agents were fired. And the ironic thing is, a week after that happened, the head of the DEA Florida office was caught taking money from drug dealers and had to be, I think he actually pled guilty and went to prison. But, you know, if you're going to have prohibition laws, you're going to have high levels of police corruption.
Well, I mean, every week that we do this program, I see the listings. There's anywhere between 3 and 10 policemen caught and arrested or sentenced to jail because of their corruption with drugs.
If you're finding 3 to 10 policemen a week across the country caught on drug crimes, you are not doing your research. It's probably at least 10 times that number.
Well, I can go by what's listed on here. It's maybe they're just doing the more severe cases where they're stealing the drugs out of the evidence room and taking money. And
speaking of taking drugs out of the evidence room, last week the police chief at a small town down in Brazoria County was arrested and put in jail for possession of controlled substances and tampering with evidence, both felonies. The allegation is that he was stealing drugs out of the evidence lockers at the police station. apparently for his own use. There no allegations that he was in any way hooked into drug trafficking, but there's an example close to home, and it got a 5-second shot on the Houston TV news and a little one-paragraph story the next morning in the Houston Chronicle. So, and those are the kinds of things that your nationwide searches normally don't turn up.
Well, it's happening on a pretty regular basis.
Yes, and it always has. I read the memoirs of an English smuggler written in about 1830, and it dealt with his life as a smuggler from about 1815 to 1825 or so. The main thing he was smuggling at that time was French wine. Now, remember, this is before they had even invented the concept of a police force. But his memoirs at that time are just full of crooked deals and under-the-cover arrangements that normally the naval officers in charge with trying to suppress smuggling were doing. When you have prohibition, you get corruption. Ran into a funny having to do with Thomas Jefferson the other day. He was active at the time that the first experiments took place in France with men going up in hot air balloons. And in Jefferson's diary or notes that he made, when he first heard about balloon flights in France, his immediate thought about that was, this is a device that will allow French lace and wine to fly over the British customs inspectors to the British population.
Lace and wine.
That
How
sounds like the
scandalous.
title for a good song. So yeah. But don't act surprised when you hear about police corruption.
Oh, it's rampant. It's everywhere, and it's just these are the few that get caught.
Another historical example, while I'm running off at the mouth here, and this dates back to the early part of the 1700s, early 1700s, when we were still British colonies. And the British government made it a crime to sell any firearm or gunpowder to any Native American. And one backwoods hunter, at least, said that one deerskin pouch containing a pound of gunpowder would make more than enough money when sold to the Indians to pay for his whole months-long trip into the wilderness.
Well, corruption and prohibition has never worked.
Yeah. Well, on a little more cheerful note, there is movement. That much movement, maybe, in the Texas legislature. 2 bills have been filed so far. One of them would reduce possession of less than, I believe, an ounce of marijuana to a Class C misdemeanor. That's the same as a traffic ticket.
But it still stays on your record.
Class C, I'm not sure if it does or not. Class
There's no
B
jail
misdemeanors
time,
where you
but-
can go to jail do, but yeah, no more so than being loud on a street corner or getting a speeding ticket. for it.
$500.
Yeah.
Well,
No
it's
jail.
just that having a drug charge on your record lowers you to become a second-class citizen.
Okay, now that's why it's a halfway measure at best. The other one is a bill, and quite frankly, I'll be more than happy when this one dies in committee and never sees the light of day. But this one would make medical use of marijuana an affirmative defense to some marijuana possession cases. Let's take a break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes with more drugs, crime, and politics.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
Better start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs, they're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
War on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, it's just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
For black market sales fueling violence, it's time to take the profit motive out of marijuana prohibition and regulate marijuana like alcohol. Remember prohibition? It still doesn't work. Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was drunk. The cartels don't kill people because they are high. To find out what you can do to help change the laws against marijuana, visit HoustonNormal.org. We meet on the third Thursday of every month. That's HoustonNormal.org. Normal rock! Normal rock!
60.
I'm in politics. We've been kind of down in the weeds here on some legal matters, so I thought I might be a little bit more uplifting and start this section by giving you the fine arts announcement for the week. Some of you might be interested in an art show that's going on in Houston right now and that extends through March the 9th. The title of this show is Chronicas, and it's 7 contemporary Mexican artists confront the drug war. The exhibits include photographs, they include assemblage, I'm not sure what all else, but if you're interested, it's from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., Wednesdays through Sundays. It's at the Photo Fest at 1113 Vine Street, and you can go to the photofest.org website for more information about it. So some of you that, excuse me, are interested to see what some of the artistic views of the Mexican drug war are, might want to check this out. It could be very interesting. So you were about to go somewhere.
Yeah, I think we need to cover this affirmative defense.
Okay.
Why we're so much against it.
Because it doesn't
Stop
protect
police action.
anybody. If you want to protect the medical marijuana patient, that protection has to be at the police car not at the courthouse. Now, remember, an affirmative defense is a factual defense. It can only be used after someone has been charged with a crime, pled not guilty, and brought to trial. At that point, the defendant has the right to introduce evidence of the medical defense. Now, the big joker in this deck is that on any factual issue, the trier of fact, whether it's a jury or the judge, has the right to believe or not believe any evidence presented to them. And if they think that your evidence is not credible, and no one can second guess them on this, then they can ignore it and still find you guilty no matter what your evidence shows. The other thing is, in order to establish an affirmative defense of medical marijuana, you would have to bring in expert medical opinion, at least your own doctor testifying that he consulted with you, he found that you suffered from a certain condition, and that he recommended to you that marijuana might be of some benefit. The problem is whether it's just your own doctor testifying or whether it's bringing in medical experts, which would really be necessary to establish the defense. You're going to have to pay them their professional fees for appearing as an expert. And those are going to amount to several $1,000s.
Plus your attorney.
You're not going to do this without an attorney to help you. This isn't a go in and do it yourself kind of trial. So I would say that for just a very simple misdemeanor possession charge, if you wanted to raise an affirmative defense, you would be looking at a minimum of $10,000 out of pocket for lawyers and expert witnesses. The other thing is, if your defense is not believed, you're looking at 6 months to a year in jail. Right now, virtually every marijuana possession case that's brought is handled by a pretrial plea agreement that ends up without any actual jail time. It might have a fine, it might have an agreement to go to some sort of counseling, it might have drug testing, but no jail time.
But that just comes right back down to clear the docket, let them stay there 28 days, and they'll agree to anything so they can get the hell out of here.
No, I'm talking about if you take someone that can raise the bail and get out the next morning, they're still going to take the plea deal rather than go to trial. If I were a practicing lawyer like I was at one time, I would strongly recommend against ever taking a marijuana possession case to trial, because it would be in my client's best interest to accept the plea deal, avoid the jailhouse, and get on with his life and do it as soon as possible. So an affirmative defense sounds great, but in the real world, it's totally useless.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing is, it's even worse than that, because the fact that it's there makes a lot of people feel good because they can say, gee, we've done something. So I am strongly against these so-called affirmative defense laws. They're feel-good pablum that don't do a bit of good in the real world.
No.
And they don't stop the other things I keep hearing you gripe about, which are unwarranted police searches and seizures and all of these other things. A medical marijuana law would be beautiful, but for it to be at all effective, it has to give the patient protection at the front door of his house or at the police car. If you wait to give him the protection when he gets to the courthouse, it's too little and too late, and it won't do the job.
Right.
So,
I mean, they've totally disrupted your life, turned it upside down.
yeah. And if you're like a lot of people, you get arrested on a possession charge, you go to jail, you can't make bail, you're probably going to lose your job, you may lose your apartment, your kids are going to go hungry while you're sitting there. So yeah, you're going to take a plea and get out of there.
Yeah.
You can't simply wait around and go to trial and then hope the jury's going to believe you when you claim that you need it for your health. It's just a sucker bet.
Yeah.
So no, I'm pretty strongly against affirmative defense laws.
Well, we have to tell you again, this is a call-in program.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, please call us. We would love to answer them. And if you're not by a telephone and you're at your computer, you can email us, and it'll go to the professor, and he will give you an answer.
Yeah, and we will quite possibly use your comment or question from that email on our next broadcast. So we'd love to hear from you. It's your show, and the telephone or the email are the only ways we have to make sure that your input gets here so that we can respond to you and talk about things you're interested in.
Well, there's been a couple of things that have happened, like up in Connecticut. There was that drug raid in 2008 that a confidential informant informed the police after she had an argument with the guy that he had drugs at his house. He had guns, and he said that he would not be taken alive. So the police came in, they threw 3 flashbang grenades, and a piece of one of the flashbang grenades hit the police officer.
Yeah.
And he hollered out that he was hit, and the first 2 or 3 policemen just started opening up fire at the man who was in a corner in a fetal position, and he was shot 6 times.
Okay.
And it just cost the state of Connecticut and those towns $3.5 million. These are the kind of things that affirmative defense does not protect you from.
Well, you know, we were talking about this case earlier. And as I was listening to you this time, I was thinking about something else. I assume the police had a search warrant here.
Yes.
And this search warrant was issued by a judge who's charged by the Constitution to find probable cause before he issues the warrant. Normally, probable cause is based on an affidavit, usually by the policeman who's applying for the warrant. And in this, he sets out the factual grounds upon which he thinks he has probable cause to conduct the search. Unfortunately, too often, the judge is asleep at the switch and doesn't really approach this rigorously. And if the affidavit says, as they frequently do, my information is based on information I have received from an informant, okay, that's not enough. You've got to have a reason in there of why you find this informant to be credible. Typically, this is an informant. He has told me things before. When he has told me things in the past, on investigation, they have turned out to be true. He has developed a record of truthfulness and honesty with me in the past, and I believe him now. Or he has told me this, and I have corroborated it by this other factual evidence. So when you've got this case that you've laid it out, where the informant is nothing but a pissed off girlfriend. I want to see the affidavit because I want to see where's the corroboration to prove that this is a credible informant rather than someone just making up a tale for, in this case, personal vengeance. At the very least, you have a judge who was asleep at the switch here in approving a search warrant based on this affidavit. And that's probably why the state was held liable in this case. But, you know, somewhere in the world at some time, there's bound to have been a confidential informant who received some consideration for their talking, whether it's money or whether it's a reduced charge or sentence for themselves or an agreement not to charge a wife. But somewhere, sometime, someplace, there's bound to be one confidential informant who is giving information in return for a benefit, who has told the truth. But in a lifetime in the law of over 40 years, I have yet to see one of them. And I think that this is important to anybody that ever gets called to jury duty in a criminal case. All confidential informants are liars, period. That comes as near being an absolute rule as anything you'll find in this world.
If they're out there trying to lessen a charge or don't forget about me and we'll take somebody bigger, they have just reason to lie.
That's right. And what's even worse, there have been some studies done, especially looking at the DEA, and they have had long time, in effect, professional confidential informants who were not only receiving regular monthly payments from the DEA to live on, but were also given percentages of anything confiscated in the criminal processes. And these guys were averaging over $100,000 a year income for several years for their informing. Now, do you want to put any trust in what they have to say?
Not a word. It's almost like we're in a hole, and no matter which way we go, they're shoveling dirt on top of us. At times it gets very frustrating sitting here reading all these things.
Yeah, and everyone keeps going back to the old Einstein quote about insanity is repeating the same experiment and expecting a different outcome. And the thing that frustrates me is that when we look at these prohibition laws, and I think you could probably trace this all the way back to God telling Adam, you're prohibited from eating that apple. No matter how far we trace back these prohibition laws, no matter what form they're put in, the result is the same. I've got three numbers that I love to quote, and I've probably done it too many times for you people at home, but I'm going to quote them again. The federal marijuana law was enacted in 1937. At that time, Harry Anslinger testified in support of the law to the Congressional Committee looking at it. And on his oath, the head of the Federal Narcotics Bureau said there are less than 200,000 marijuana users in the whole country. 200,000 users in 1937. In 1960, the government ran a survey, and based upon their survey of the entire United States, they said there were approximately 1 million marijuana users in the country. Now, at that time, it had been against the federal law for over 20 years, and it had been the equivalent of heroin in terms of penalties for over 10 years. So we're now up to 1 million users in 1960. In 1970, we passed the current Controlled Substances Act, and 2 years ago, in 2010, the government estimated that over 40% of the adult Americans had used marijuana at least once in their life, and 40% of the population would be 200 million. I mean, yeah, or over 100 million anyway, about 150 million. So here we have 1937, 200,000 users, 1960, 1 million users, 2010, over 100 million users. You know, if General Motors had had this kind of building growth curve, they wouldn't have had to go through a bailout. So first, prohibition laws don't work.
No, they don't. They never have. Okay. They never will.
Okay. And I think we probably need to take a break, and we'll be back in about a minute or two.
Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Today we're going to go over how easy it is for you to call your member of Congress or senators as a constituent. As MPP's federal lobbyist on Capitol Hill, I talk to the members of Congress and senators and their staff members quite a bit, but today I'm actually going to call my member of Congress directly as a constituent to show you how easy it is. Before we do that, let's go over a couple of important points. First of all, it's very important to be brief when you call. These folks are extremely busy. Number two, when you call, you want to start by introducing yourself, say that you are a constituent, and tell the staffer your city and zip code. Number three, you can get talking points and tips from our website on what to say. If there's a specific piece of legislation we've asked you to call about, please mention the bill number. Number four, you should request a written response from your member of Congress on this topic. Number five, be sure to thank the staffer for their time at the end of the call. Let's try it out. I'm calling my member of Congress, Chris Van Hollen, right now.
Good afternoon, Congressman Van Hollen's office.
Hi, this is Aaron Houston, and I'm a constituent, and I just wanted to register my belief about an issue.
Okay, do you mind holding on for just a moment?
No problem.
Hey, sorry for the wait. I just had the appropriate form up.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
As I said, I'm Aaron Houston, and I'm a constituent. I live in Tacoma Park, 20912 area zip code. And I just wanted to call and ask the congressman to support taxing and regulating marijuana like alcohol, given that the Mexican cartels get 70% of their profits from marijuana sales in the United States alone, and given that we could make $40 billion from taxing and regulating marijuana like alcohol, I would hope that the congressman would sign on to any legislation that would be introduced to that effect or support it.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if I can get a written response from the congressman on the topic, if he has a position on it.
Okay.
And my address, it's best to send to work, is P.O. Box 77492, Washington, D.C. 20013.
Sorry, 20013?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Hey, thank you so much for your time.
Is there anything else to address except the P.O. box and then the city and zip?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem.
Bye. See how easy that was? Call and send us a copy of the letter once you receive it.
I'm in politics. CJ, you were just telling us about something that's happening in Austin tomorrow.
Yes.
What's going on?
Texas Lobby Day.
Okay.
Representatives from all over Texas of NORML, representatives from NORML, are going up to the Capitol and hand delivering Texas legislator education packets to our representatives while they're in session. The packet teaches them about cannabis.
It doesn't teach a legislator anything. It may try to teach a legislator something.
Well, the packet contains information about cannabis, marijuana, and hemp, their benefits, and also the dangers of the laws that are on the books now. They are going up there, you know, like I said, to hand deliver them, talk to the representatives in person. People are coming from, excuse me, Dallas, Fort Worth, Waco, Plano, Corpus Christi, San Antonio. I even got a message from somebody that said they are coming from El Paso, and of course, people here in Houston, like our own President Steve Nolan. And it's to go up there to let our governing body know that.
Okay. Now, this isn't strictly a marijuana event. I mean, or is it? Isn't this just a general lobby day for people doing all sorts of things?
I don't know what anybody else is going up there for, but I believe NORML is going up there for changes in marijuana.
I mean, it
is about marijuana.
Just marijuana?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not competing with the people on school reform?
No,
or
I don't believe so.
Any of the other things? Well, that's good. That's really good.
It's just a legislative day that we have for medical marijuana or marijuana legalization.
Okay. So, any pre-indications from any of the legislators about what kind of reception you'll get? Or?
No. The ones that people have talked to in person beforehand, at least as the interviewers go, they all felt comfortable talking to their representatives and felt that the representatives were receptive to what they had to say. Now, that's one thing. The actions that follow that are what we're worried about, we're concerned about.
I found that when I talked with Dwayne Bohack, my representative, he was all happy about it, but didn't do anything about it.
There's Cheyenne Weldon. She's from Austin NORML. She was in Houston a while back and talked to the House representative for District 146, Bernie Miles. He was just like that. He said he was all for changing the law for cannabis, and he just didn't think anybody in his district would be behind that. Well, we started on a couple of different online forums getting people to communicate with him. And just in events that NORML has held throughout the last couple of weeks, coincidentally, we've come across people who are, of course, in his district, and we've told them straight away, you know, make sure you call this guy, call your representatives, let them know how you feel about the laws that are going on right now.
But if you really want to make an impact on your representative, you'll sit down and write a longhand letter, throw it in the snail mail. Every representative I've talked to here in the state said that those letters mean so much more than an email or a phone call.
And what I always like to say, too, is that all of these representatives also have offices in their home district. It's not that hard to get an appointment and go in and look them in the eye and make them talk to you.
Now, ideally, they'd be in Austin tomorrow.
Yes.
But,
I mean,
after the
way our sessions are set up with what is it, 140 days every other year.
Every 2 years.
It's all crammed into one big mess, so that there's not really much way to get anything done.
But they have telephones also in their offices. Give them a call, let them hear your voice.
Yeah.
I mean, my representative, his office here at town is closed until the end of the legislative session.
Okay, yeah. That's probably not too unusual. Because,
no, I don't think it is.
Because they do stay very busy through this 4-month period. And I believe the last day for filing new legislation is about a week away. So if you're trying to get a new bill up for consideration, you need to get it in within just a few days to a member of the legislature who's willing to sponsor it. Unfortunately, Texas does not have any way for an individual citizen to initiate a bill, and it does not have anything at all like a referendum law where a petition initiative system can be used to get legislation accomplished. So the only thing that can be done is to work through the elected representatives that are up there now. And if people don't know who their representative is,
they can go to HoustonNormal.org, and on the top right-hand corner, there's a space to put in your zip code. It brings up a list of federal and state senators, representatives. Below that is another form you can fill out with your address, and it'll tell you more specifically who your district reps are. And those are the ones you want to call. And, I know you guys call probably. Those are the ones you're going to want to call and let them know how you want the laws changed.
Email them, call them.
Contact them, period.
Just contact them, and don't just do it once.
Yeah.
Make a nuisance
Follow
out
up.
of yourself.
Sheila Jackson Lee is going to be getting a call from me sometime this week. I ran into her at a town hall meeting and asked her how she felt about regulating marijuana like alcohol and tobacco, and she said she didn't have an opinion. And I was kind of shocked that somebody who helps run our government didn't have an opinion on it at all when it's such a in the now issue, you know.
Well, now, you know, that's part of the problem, and this is something that nudges from voters help them. I suspect that if you looked at the 535 congressmen and senators, probably half of them don't even know that there is a marijuana law. It's not something that until just very, very recently has been in front of the popular eye at all.
Right.
And especially none of them, except a small handful, has any knowledge of or any interest in any of the details of the law. You've probably passed the competency of most elected representatives, state or federal. If you go past marijuana's bad, marijuana's against the law.
Well, now they have a Texas legislator education packet that can outline all that. I mean, you know.
Well, we can all hope that each of them has at least one person on their staff that knows how to read that can explain it to them.
Right.
As you can tell, I don't have a very high opinion of most elected representatives. So.
No, they're people that are just looking out for their future.
Well,
if
the
lucky,
information's
maybe I
online.
can become a congressman and have a good retirement.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're going to have some good news to report about Lobby Day the next time we're here.
I hope so. I hope so.
And I might as well let the cat out of the bag here. Earlier we were talking about the two bills that had been filed in the legislature. One to reduce possession to a Class C misdemeanor, and the other an affirmative defense. There also is a very good draft comprehensive medical marijuana bill, and some negotiations are going on, and within luck, in the next few days, a state senator will file it in Austin. But I'm also pessimist enough to know that even if he files it, chances are that, like the other marijuana bills, it will never even get committee hearings.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part when we see the legislative sessions going on. There's bills that get introduced because they're dealing with marijuana. We can't even get hearings half the time.
Well, no, we can't even get hearings, period, not just half the time. Part of the problem, and this is something else to get in touch with your state senators about, it takes either 2/3 or 3/4, I forget which, vote to even get a bill scheduled for debate in a committee hearing in the Senate. Unless you have a 3/4 vote to start with, you can't even debate the bill, let alone vote on it. So that's a procedural problem in the Texas Senate that needs to be corrected as quickly as possible. Okay. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hello. Do you have
I was thinking about the scare tactics the last 6 months on prescription overdose deaths. How there's 9,000 people that die every year, one every 19 minutes.
Yeah.
They've been saying this noise for almost a year, and now the FDA changed it where a regular doctor, your family physician, can't prescribe controlled substance without all sorts of hassles.
Okay. We're about out of time, so let me comment on that quickly. Thank you for the call. The FDA has recommended several tight controls on prescription opiates. The problem is that's not the FDA's jurisdiction. That's what the DEA does under their control of the prescription process. And the fishy thing is the DEA was the one that asked the FDA to do this. The other side is the Journal of the American Medical Association, in their latest edition, has come out with a very good study on overdose deaths. And the interesting thing is very, very few of them were straightforward opioid overdoses. Most of them were mixtures of, say, Vicodin or Oxycontin and Xanax. Benzodiazepines, anti-anxiety drugs, and that's a really nasty, deadly combination. So really, if you get rid of the accidental, the purposeful suicides, the combined drugs and everything else, the number of direct opioid overdose deaths is very, very much exaggerated in the scare stories. And so far, he was a little mistaken in that the FDA has taken the issue under investigation, but they haven't ruled on it yet. And speaking of ruling on it yet, we're running out of time. The clock's rolling down. I hope some of you make it to Austin tomorrow. If you can't be at Austin, at least let your representative to know how you feel on these issues. Give them a call, an email, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories in you.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. You end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods,